This is from Chapter 2, Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and the Phenomenon of Re-Experience, and the Making of One Centaur. Heading, Perinatal Psychology, the Phenomenon of Re-Experience, and my personal involvement with this research into our actual human nature. How do we go about changing the patterns of millennia? How do we change and change radically and soon? How do we bring about the consciousness transformation that will allow us to avert the humanicidal, indeed ecocidal, scenario we are currently bringing about at breakneck speed? Well, it is pretty clear that it is ignorance pushing these trends, along with unconscionable doses of denial and ignorance. So reversing this means learning why it is humans can be so self-destructive. Ignorance must be replaced with awareness and understanding. Looking at our problems must be happening more than our current denial is. We must trace our current ecocidal tendencies to their roots. We must do something about them there. This is something I have been doing for over 40 years. I sought the answers to our most important questions. I did not know that someday these questions would be as pressing as they are currently. I thought we would have turned the corner on these problems a long time ago, as indeed we should have done if we were to give ourselves any real chance. Heading, The Making of One Centaur. Subheading, About me, my beginnings, my motivation, and all about a generation. As I said, I am a pre- and perinatal psychologist. That is my major area of expertise, though I have several others. I have been involved in deep feeling therapy, specifically primal therapy, and have been facilitating folks in primal therapy, rebirthing vivation, and holotropic primal breathwork for 40 years now. I have been writing for 45 years, and what my deep feeling experiences took me and other people into is a realization of the truth about ourselves, but also about the world. I have been on a long journey to find out what the truth is. I am a child of the 60s, born in 1950. The 60s and the early 70s was a very troubled time, but also a euphoric time. As one author described it in a title for his book about that period, Days of Rage, Days of Hope. There was that. But there was one defining characteristic of those times and my generation. It was obvious as hell at the time, and which truly defined it and gives it its saliency. Yet it is rarely, if ever, mentioned. There are reasons why it would be judiciously kept from collective consciousness, which we will not go into at this time. For that, see my work, Culture War, Class War. Yeah, what is never pointed out has to do with the quality of discovery that permeated that period of time, along with the eruption of the search for truth, which characterized just about everything important that defined the 60s, early 70s. As I have pointed out elsewhere, the 60s generation was, quote, the last educated generation, end quote. Liberalism, as personified by the Kennedys and LBJ, dominated. And on campuses, liberal arts was the common root for a generation who had been taught that education and knowledge was an end in itself, not just, as it became later, as I detail in the book mentioned, a means to employment in a corporate world. It was the first postmodern era. By that I mean modernity is defined as the belief in the value of the singular advance of technology and social evolution in a straight line. If modernity had not given way to postmodernity, picture a future like the Jetsons or even Star Trek. For now, I will put to the side a discussion that modernity cannot continue because it relied on an aggressive exploitation of the environment, which has its limits and so would not be possible. The 60s began the postmodern era. Though through technological advances in telecommunications and transportation, a value on higher education, and its consequent explosion of information into all the sciences, and most importantly the social sciences, the most prosperous America that has ever been, fueled by the ongoing success of New Deal legislation with taxes in the 90% range throughout the 50s and the early 60s at the highest bracket for the filthy rich, which stimulated a higher education that was affordable, a sturdy safety net in welfare and social programs, allowing a little more risk in one's life decisions. For the adventurous, the creative, and the foolhardy, quite often they all went together in single individuals. More about that later when we talk about wounded deer centaurs and the characteristics of recent generations. And a comfortable middle class who would raise children instilled with ideals of progress, education, and a better tomorrow in all areas. With all these things, there was an explosion of information on the campuses in all respects. And what was being learned about humanities, history, other cultures and peoples through anthropology, understandings of the real causes of actions, not the theologically infused explanations that had formerly been the understandings of the common person heretofore, through knowledge that was coming out of the behavioral sciences, was fueling a new understanding of the self, the society, the relation between the two, and the possibilities of humanness and life. It can be understand how this would lead to movements for civil rights, for women's rights, and for rights of indigenous peoples. What was being learned in the behavioral sciences was helping us to reverse notions of a superiority and dominion over nature that had led to a cruelty to all of nature and to all planet mates who were not human. Through LSD and explorations in psychology, there were breakthroughs in conscious research and understandings of the nature of reality which was congruent with earlier in the century discoveries in quantum physics. All in all, things were changing. Everything was changing. The world was being remade anew. Everything was possible. And my generation saw the possibility to understand everything and to do things right that had never been done before, and create societal structures and human relations that had never before existed, but which would be workable and might even lead to a utopian future. Not a Jetson technological future, but a future that brought together the best of everything that was true from all over the world and from every area of knowledge into a grand amalgam of utopian results.
Wow.
It is not hard to understand why there would be a generation gap at the time, as one generation, the young, were being exposed to and were creating worlds vastly different from their parents. Everything was changing. Still, with the collapse of the modern era and its certainties about the values of continued technological advance within a framework of understandings of family, community, that were traditional and stable and theologically supported and maintained, parentheses, the overthrow of certainty about religion was another huge but neglected factor in the changes and the promise of something new, end parens. We did not know what the truth was, yet. Though with the confidence we had and the euphoria of new discovery everywhere around and the relatively comfortable financial circumstances of our lives, we felt that at any time and just around the corner we would discover that holy grail of truth. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War, pervasive racism and sexism, and many other injustices that abounded were telling us that a lot of the things that we were told about our country were false. In America, but in most countries in the world, in all the developed nations, this was going on. So there was a great awakening for a lot of us, and we found out a lot of things about our culture was just not right. It was just off. You see, we had a generation that wanted to find out what the truth was, and I was one of those. I set off in that direction. I pursued the truth through many things, both academically and experientially, and I ended up going deeper into myself. After activism and anti-war activity and things of that sort, I wanted to go deeper into myself to find the real roots of the intractable problems we were facing in our world. We wanted to find out how to really change things. For it did not take long after our initial high hopes in stopping a war were crushed, dismissed, ignored, see culture war, class war, and finally attacked with military guns and murder at Kent State and Jackson State, for us to realize that the huge problems would not be easily solved, no matter how sincere the intentions we held. Later, our efforts to bring attention to the environmental crisis were stymied, leading many of us to wonder why people would not take action when the lives of their children were at stake. So the movements in the 60s led many of us to go inward to seek the answers. For clearly, outward action was not effective. And we saw that we were encountering not just the problems and issues of a country or an age, let alone just of a generation, but we were coming up against the roots of all evils of all times. And my generation, seeing that, coming up against that intransigence of society, realized we were encountering the blocks to progress in all ages. We looked deeper into that and we saw economic problems. We saw cultural problems. We saw problems of race and ethnicity, of prejudice, bigotry, misogyny, and so on. But the most astute of us realized that all of these had deeper roots. They had roots inside ourselves. They had psychological roots. They had spiritual roots. And the rest of the culture saw that we were doing that. They witnessed the Beatles getting involved in transcendental meditation. We saw movements around EST, and many other personal growth movements. Folks were taking seminars at Esalen. People were returning to the country to get close to nature. Of course we were taking LSD, psilocybin, shrooms, peyote, and other drugs. Both the psychedelic, mind-expanding, and the not-so-mind-expanding, we learned. To try to snatch loose those bits of truth about ourselves that might be applicable to all. We worked on our relationships and our communications, knowing full well how gender inequality had been a keystone of the insanity of all civilized times. Alongside that, we had a sexual revolution to once and for all rid ourselves of the crazy thoughts and jealousy that arose around the circumstances of folks sharing pleasure and their bodies with each other. We knew that it made no fucking sense at all. Though we felt that insanity within us and wanted no part of it in our world or in any world we would help to create.
Excuse me.
We saw such sexual dysfunction as actually the root of rape, sexual abuse, pedophilia, and the like, and we understood how it tied into misogyny and to generally unhappy people living unhappy lives. Generation after generation. We read Freud, but many of us graduated and saw the light reading Wilhelm Reich. The point is that my generation and the society as a whole around the entire world were looking inward to find the roots of the troubles of all time. And we saw manifesting all around us in the outside world. We wanted to make a better world. And we were willing to go where we needed and to do what it took to find out how to do that. So many of us went searching inside. The Beatles didn't lead us so much as they reflected us. When the Beatles went to India and became involved in meditation, the whole world knew it, but they were only doing what many others of my generation were doing at the same time. The same with their psychedelic drug use. They hardly started that. They were just visible and typical, if there could be such a thing for a generation so exploding with variety, with creativity. They were typical members of an ongoing worldwide movement. Along those same lines, I did not go into primal therapy because John Lennon and Yoko Ono did that. Hardly, for I was already on that path and had been for a full 4 years before I read the famous interview with John and Yoko in Rolling Stone in 1972, in which they described their experiences in and views on primal therapy. That was 1972, but my quest began in my first semester at college in the fall of 1968, where I learned, not in classrooms, but from fellow students, the hidden knowledge of all ages. We passed around secretively books on Gandhi, Eric Fromm, Plato, and other philosophers. We shared the Herat experiment and began to understand just how really sexually screwed up our societies and cultures have been for hundreds and thousands of years. An older mentor of mine, strangely enough, he was my wrestling coach in high school and was a former Marine, showed me his hidden stash one day. He had also been the guidance counselor, and he was a good friend. I was visiting him in that first year of college back at the old high school in his counselor's office, and the conversation moved to my excitement about the things I was learning. Yes, I told him about Gandhi and Plato and Fromm and the art of loving and Khalil Gibran and the prophet. And I told him about Zen and Plato's allegory of the cave and Alan Watts and the wisdom of insecurity and all this heady and exotic stuff. He listened, almost waiting until he was sure. Then he opened that top drawer of his desk, pulled out what he had secreted away there. Hell, I had known him well for 6 years, had gone on trips with him. I had visited his family, and I was beginning a regular correspondence with him. But I never saw this part of him. Man and His Symbols by Carl G. Jung. He said, here, take and read this. Look into this man. This is the real deal here. Wow, former Marine, high school wrestling coach, closet mystic. That's a resume I never imagined. Oddly, he was right. It is amazing what even Marines can know. And I headed off on a 3-year study of Jung. Became a Jungian in my views and my writings. By the end of the first semester of my 3rd year of college, December 1970, I wrote my first book, From a Jungian Viewpoint. Parentheses, The Dangers of Mysticism for Modern Youth. End parens. I turned it in as a term paper to 2 of my professors. They were astounded. The one professor stopped grading me for my work after that. In other courses I had with him and just gave me the automatic A+. He would record that before I turned anything in, telling me I had gone off the charts. But that first book was important, and it set me off on a life of writing that I have had ever since. It came as a revelation, my first major one, and it served as an antidote, writing that book, at the time, to the psychological turmoil that had been unleashed in me by all the openings I had been doing in spiritual, intellectual, and personal ways. I mean, I didn't do this 60s thing halfway. I had hitchhiked into California back in the summer of 1969, and had hitchhiked all over the northeastern United States and Quebec and Ontario provinces and Canada the following summer. I had done my share of drug experimentation. I had been meditating. I had a couple of OBEs. Had been at the million people largest demonstration in history in Washington, D.C. on a moratorium day, November 15th, 1969. Had participated in demonstrations and teach-ins and anti-war pamphleting and discussion with folks about the war in the downtown of my college's city, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I held my share of candles in the rain. I did my dues heckling Nixon when he flew into the Lancaster airport and gave a speech there. I carted people there in my VW bus with chaotic, multicolored spray paint covering every square foot of it. As for my sexual revolution, none of your business. Seriously, though, it was nowhere near as colorful as I wished or heard stories about, but I did some personal growth, yeah. I was no armchair hippie or radical, or academic for that matter. Oh, and yeah, I know what you're waiting to ask. In 1969, after having seen Hendrix and Joplin and all the other biggies at the 3-day Newport Rock Festival in Newport Beach, California in the summer of 1969, and had the interesting experience of being chased with a crowd of others down the street alongside the festival by cadre of CHP and riot gear, and weeks later gotten back to Pennsylvania only a few hundred miles from Woodstock, and the air was abuzz with this festival in easy distance of my hometown, my girlfriend's mother wouldn't let her go. So yeah, I missed Woodstock. I really fucking did. My only regret at the time, women, my downfall. That's as far as I got.
Very good.
Really good.
Very good.
You got a lot in there.
Yes. Impressive. That was the 60s experience. It really was.
Yeah.
It was the first time I wrote about that like that. I told people about that, and all of a sudden it seemed apropos to write it here. You know? Because it was all about we were trying to find the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I did. I mean, we were all doing it. And people don't realize that. It wasn't fucking fun and games and partying. We were trying to find the truth. We weren't doing acid to get high. We were doing acid to find out about ourselves, to find out what the fucking problems was. It was all screwed up. We wanted to know what the fuck was going on. And we really, really felt that we could change it all. We really thought we could change the world. Oh, you know, you've heard about it. You've heard it being put down. Oh, they wanted to change the world. You know, the hippies, they think they could change the world. Yeah, we did. We thought we could change the fucking world because the people were so fucking stupid that anything we thought was a brilliant revelation compared to them. So of course we thought we could do it right. They were doing it so wrong. You know? But then they crushed us. So then we had to find out, how could we do it right? How can we get away with doing it right? It wasn't just about doing it right. It was like, how the fuck can we pull it off in a culture that wants to crush you for being better? In a culture that wants to crush you for being good? In a culture that wants to crush you for helping them out? What the fuck are we going to do, you know? That was my generation. They crushed us because they didn't want a revolution. They didn't want an evolution. They didn't want people getting better. They didn't want a sexual revolution where people were going to not have hang-ups anymore. They wanted the fucking hang-ups. Could make money on hang-ups. It certainly could keep the niggers down. That's meaning all of us. You know? Keep us down with fear, sexual hang-ups, and all the rest. You know? And no revelations. You can't have revelations. You gotta outlaw LSD and all the rest because you can't have people getting free. No, they crushed us. So we had answers. And we were implementing them. And they would have fucking worked, you know?
Right.
With a few tweaks.
All these movements were changed by the fact that we were voting for Republican presidents.
Yeah.
And with all the political power that is there, it was now moving against the 60s ideas.
Absolutely. That's what they did. They managed to fucking get themselves into power. We had Carter, and then ever since then it was downhill.
Yeah.
And then when they could, it didn't, even when the people could see through that, then they start stealing the elections. They gave us 8 years of a fucking Republican with 2 stolen elections.
Yeah.
Unfucking believable.
So that's a very...
So we didn't even have the electoral process anymore for them to fucking take us over. They didn't even have to work through that. They tweak with the fucking machines and use the Supreme Court, you know. Wow. Take away democracy. Yeah, they crushed us. And that was like the end result. It's like George W. Bush era was like the fucking it was like the other side of the pendulum, you know? It's like we had the 60s, then we had George W. Bush. It was like the fucking total end. Obama's just starting to come back in this direction.
Well,
He's not where we were.
You're forgetting Clinton was in there too.
Clinton.
Yeah.
Clinton saved the economy.
Yeah, he did.
He did. What are you going to do? He had to make concessions.
Yes.
You know, Obama's making concessions.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I don't know what it's like to be president. All I know is we were prosperous in the 90s.
Yeah.
We were fucking prosperous.
Yes.
That's right.
And then Bush threw it all away to his rich friends. Now, that says it all to me. It's like, the bottom line is money, and Clinton gave us money.
Yes.
Clinton got us money, and he got it by doing a tax increase on the rich. Just a little bit. A couple of percentage points. I think it was up to 35 to 38% or something like that. Nothing near the 90% for the top bracket that was like in the 50s and the early 60s. Nothing like that.
And
But just a few percentage points helped out.
And he cleared up some of the deficit, wasn't it?
Yes, he did.
Wasn't it at,
They
was
were
it,
actually... They,
132 billion at that point?
well, let's put it this way. It's trillions and trillions is a national debt. That's
Yeah.
how much we owe. The deficit, the budget, is like for 1 year. Like, do we pay as much as... Do we get in as much as we're paying? And he balanced the budget. Reagan didn't. Reagan promised he would. He didn't balance the budget. It took a Democrat to balance the budget and actually get some more money to pay back on the national debt.
Yeah.
So we had a surplus, meaning surplus over, we couldn't pay off the national debt. It's trillions and trillions of fucking dollars, way up there. I mean, mega trillions. But we were starting to pay it down. And we had what they call a surplus, which is what we wouldn't have had if we hadn't balanced the budget. It was like we brought in more money during those 8 years than we spent. And that was money that we could use and to invest. And then the Republicans threw it away. They fucking threw it away. They were talking at the time that we could have solar electricity, solar panels in every home in America with that money. And we fucking gave it to the rich folks. For what? To put in their fucking banks, run wars with, and you know whatever the fuck they do, you know, manipulate people with. They can fucking
We could
believe
have
it.
homeless shelters in every community in the nation.
We wouldn't have any homeless.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
We could have drug rehab. We could have lots of things. But just to consider, you know, that with the planet coming to an end, we could have had solar panels on every house in America for electricity.
Think of that. Yeah.
So yeah, it's like where we're at right now is the 60s was like this incredible eruption of euphoria, knowledge, thinking, searching, understanding, revelation. And then we went to the fucking, by the time we got to Bush, it was like we had come all the way here. Clinton was on the way, you know. Clinton was still trying to come back this way. It was like Reagan was going this way. Clinton was coming this way, back, all the way out here to Bush, right? It was installed, right? And Obama's starting to come back. But we're fucking not anywhere near where we were. We could have had an incredible world. And we have to.
Yeah.
We have to have an incredible world. It's not going to last.
That's right.
That's why you are writing.
Do my part. We all got to do our part.
Yeah. We did.
Yeah. You've done good.
Yeah. That really was very personal.
Yeah.
But it also gave, a flavoring of what the 60s generation was
Doesn't it?
like.
That
Yes,
was
it
what I was
really
thinking.
was.
I wanted to give a flavor.
Yeah, because...
It's the untold story, the flavor. People don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just make fun of it, you know? They have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate it when you hear people putting the hippies down, and they don't even know what a hippie is.
Flavor, the flavor of the times.
Yeah.
People do not have the flavor of the times. Even that book I mentioned, Days of Rage, Days of Hope. You know, especially if Todd Gitlin was looking at it politically. I mean, no, there was cultural phenomenon going on about knowledge and everything. There was this postmodern. Postmodern means that modern is like Western civilization going forward lockstep in a particular direction, as it had been for hundreds of years. Christopher Columbus, and then that leads to this, and this leads to that, and this leads to that, and every invention leads to another change in culture. But no, by the 60s, we were exposed to ideas from all around the world, indigenous cultures, and all kinds of shit. And it was like, what's the truth? Well, it wasn't Western civilization anymore. Maybe not. We were looking at Mao. We're looking at communism. We're looking at everything. We're looking at indigenous culture. We're looking at Native American culture. We're looking at Mexican culture.
Africans.
And African culture. All of that was a mix. And we were saying, let's look at it all and see what we can come up with. It's not lockstep anymore. Let's see what we can do. After all, we are running out of planet. We can't fucking just go lockstep, continuing to exploit the environment and have more and more technology, technology, create more and more shit to put in, so we're going to be swimming in fucking garbage. We can't do that. We have to come up with another idea. We have to change it a different way. And that way is going to be inner, it's going to be personal, it's going to be spiritual, it's going to require something like that. And that's what's going on. It's called postmodernism, and what it means, typical way of describing postmodernism is to you have these genres in art and sculpture and everything like that, and it's like this is the such and such era, the Baroque or the Elizabethan, and it's like there's all of a particular kind, right? The postmodern art, now think of this not just as art but as culture. Postmodern art might have like a sculpture that's got an element from one era, an element from another era, an element from a primitive tribe, like it had reflective of an indigenous culture or something like that. It's like completely creative. No longer any template. Everybody making a different template using all of the ingredients available. And there's lots. Never been so many different ingredients. We have a multiculturalism that's it's never existed on this plane of existence. It's never existed on this earth. Yeah. For the first time, we know what the fuck is going on everywhere around the globe. And we know all the different kinds of people and all the different kinds of ideas. So we have the most incredible fucking soup for which to have creativity. We have a cosmic, a global soup going on here with which we can create anything.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, they're trying, no, we can't have that. You might have too much, solutions to problems and stuff, Yeah. Not to mention euphoria, and even fun. We're being dragged down. We have an era where anything is possible, and we're being dragged down to suicide instead. Because there are forces that cannot change. And they would rather die and kill us all off than have to change.
Yeah. Well, I think this, the fact that you've communicated to your readers this wonderful array that freedom could give us, and all the things that you've gone through, it will bring about a response in people. He can do it, I can do it,
Yeah, I hope so.
Right.
There's a lack of euphoria. There's a lack of motivation. There's a lack of passion.
It just seems that it's very indicative for people of his age, my age.
Yes.
Really, we've all been. We're not of the 60s. We were born in the 60s, and there's a whole other problem that's arisen. We have nowhere to go.
That's right. Mars is not inhabitable these days.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. That's where they're shooting us. Very good point,
That
Marilyn.
is so ridiculous.
Yes.
Instead of dealing what's at our doorstep, we'll move to Mars,
Any
we'll
true
crack
leaders?
behind. No, that's not going to get us anywhere.
Any true leaders that might have been forthcoming were taken away. Yeah.
So all the assassinations.
Yes.
Think of it. The Kennedys and
Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anwar
They kept, Anwar Sadat. That's another good example.
Yeah,
they kept chopping off the fucking head over and over and over again. The chopping off the head of growth,
Yes.
They kept doing it. Unbelievable.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then we have to continue to regrow another one. That's like, oh my God. They know where to go. They know where to go to stymie a movement, They go right to the center of it. fucking take out his heart, you know?
Yeah.
John Lennon, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, JFK. Wow, you can't get more. The center,
Really.
they were like little cyclones, you know, of energy going out into the world, changing it
Yeah.
just from themselves. Unbelievable. They fucking just castrated us by taking them away from us.
Oh, yeah.
Physical progress that we've had. You know, people who never considered going to the library or what are beginning to wake up and realize, you know.
Well, yeah, and they have to be directed to the stuff that they should be listening to. Because there is a lot of misinformation and misleading things that, you know, are making people crazy and give up.
Yeah.
Or follow the wrong path, the path to nowhere. And you read it very well.